Item of business is a members' business debate on motion 3354 in the name of Kenneth Gibson on It's OK to Talk, period. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would ask those who wish to speak to press the request to speak buttons now, please. And I call on Kenneth Gibson to open the debate. Around 7 minutes, please, Mr Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's a privilege to open this debate today, and I'm grateful to all those who signed my motion, allowing us to raise awareness of endometriosis. I'd also like to welcome the Glasgow Endometriosis Group to the gallery today, and in particular Anne Devlin, who has been in contact with me regularly in recent months regarding endometriosis and the need to improve specialist treatment and services. Indeed, it was Anne who inspired me to seek this debate, which I hope will reassure sufferers that the importance of endometriosis is indeed recognised by this Parliament. The first and last time a parliamentary debate was dedicated to endometriosis was 16 years ago, on 28th of June 2001, and it was secured by Annabel Goldie MSP. That wasn't even in this chamber, as it was 3 years before this building was completed. And of the 5 speakers in that debate, only Elaine Smith and I have not yet retired, which will come as no surprise given our youth. On Saturday, 25th of next month, thousands of men and women will march in cities across the world to raise awareness of endometriosis, taking part in the 4th Worldwide Endometriosis March. One of these events takes place in Glasgow. And of course, next week, from 6th to 12th of March, is Endometriosis Awareness Week. And this year's theme is, It's OK to Talk, period. I disagree. I think it is necessary that we talk and absolutely vital that we act now. Endometriosis has to be a condition with the lowest profile in relation to the number of women affected by it. I can't help thinking this would be very different if men suffered from it too. Endometriosis is the second most common gynecological condition in Scotland, and according to Endometriosis UK, around 10% of women of reproductive age are affected, which of course mean hundreds within my own constituency of Cunningham North. Furthermore, studies have estimated that between 30 and 50% of women dealing with infertility suffer from endometriosis. The word period in this year's slogan also serves as more than a punctuation mark. It was included to make young girls and women aware that not all period pain is normal. When endometrial tissue that should line the womb grows elsewhere in the body, it still reacts to the menstrual cycle each month and breaks down. With this tissue having nowhere to go, it leads to inflammation and the formation of scar tissue. This is not only painful and debilitating, apart from its physical effects, it has been known to lead to depression, anxiety and fear of intimacy. And of course, women living with endometriosis may find their careers impacted. During what must already be a confusing time for many teenage girls, not all be aware to what extent pain and discomfort are normal or could be a sign of endometriosis. This illustrates why so many women don't even know they have it. And according to Endometriosis UK, the average time for diagnosis after first symptoms are experienced is 7.5 years. So urgent work is required to achieve both earlier diagnosis and better treatment options. Every woman's condition is different, and there is no one-treatment-fits-all approach. One of my constituents' suffering was relieved only after a hysterectomy, but she knows of at least 3 others for whom this was not the solution. Every endometriosis sufferer requires a specialist and tailored treatment for their endometriosis. This can only be effectively provided by a team of specialists, preferably in accredited endometriosis units. There are currently only 2 accredited endometriosis units in Scotland, compared to 47 in England. For a country with the geographical characteristics and population of Scotland, this is simply not enough. With the only specialised units being located in Aberdeen and Edinburgh, it's sad to say that the majority of endometriosis patients in Scotland are not readily being provided with the required specialist care. It is much more difficult for women living in the west of Scotland to get access to specialised care than the east or in England, and it is up to the Scottish Government to address this health inequality. Even if one of my constituents is referred by a gynaecologist to the Edinburgh unit, they may have to forgo treatment because of logistical or financial issues, which of course goes against everything this government stands for. I wrote to the Health Secretary last June about this and was pleased to be informed that an accredited endometriosis centre for the west of Scotland is indeed in the pipeline. This followed a pledge by then Cabinet Secretary for Health and Wellbeing Alex Neil MSP in April 2014 that the Scottish Government would support a review of how endometriosis services are delivered in Scotland. Proposals were put forward by Endometriosis UK and research staff at the University of Edinburgh that the management of complex endometriosis would best be achieved by multidisciplinary teams working within accredited specialist centres across Scotland. A short-life working group was then established to consider these proposals, bringing together a range of stakeholders to consider evidence regarding current service provision and how this can be improved. In 2015, the group's recommendations included the need to establish a third specialist centre in the west of Scotland, accredited by the British Society for Gynaecological Endoscopy. The Cabinet Secretary informed me that NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde are currently leading on developing a proposal to set up a specialist endometriosis centre for the west of Scotland. It is my understanding that this work is still ongoing, which makes me fear that any progress that's being made is coming along very slowly, glacial almost. I had also been informed that a constituent was advised by NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde that implementation might start later this year, so we remain hopeful that everything will come together in due course. I hope the Minister will enlighten us. Although I'm pleased that this government did the right thing in being the first to put endometriosis on its agenda nearly 3 years ago, in 2017 my constituents and many others still do not have a centre they can easily go to. I'm unsure as to what progress has been made in serving the needs of women living with endometriosis since the previous debate 16 years ago, other than what I've already mentioned, but I believe I speak for sufferers across the West when I say it has not been enough. A month or a year may not seem a long time to those who aren't affected by it, but perhaps a couple of quotes from women living with endometriosis will put this in perspective. Great topic for members' business. I suffer from it and it literally destroys at least 2 out of 4 weeks. And this horrific condition has blighted my life. Presiding Officer, I believe this government will do the right thing and eliminate the existing health inequalities that exist for endometriosis sufferers, not only in comparison to England, but also between women living in different areas of Scotland. And I conclude by quoting that one of my constituents, herself a sufferer, wrote to me, "The women of Scotland need more accredited units with multi-specialist approach. As one specialist stated, one competent surgeon saves countless women. We all need a fight to end endo. Endometriosis needs to be history." Over to you, Minister. Thank you.
Can I ask our visitors in the gallery, please, not to clap or cheer or anything, and perhaps at the end of the debate we can have the chance to show any appreciation, or indeed otherwise, that you might have. Thank you very much. I now call, as part of the open speeches of around 4 minutes, Alison Harris to be followed by Stuart Stevenson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and thank you to Kenny Gibson for bringing forward for members' business a topic which affects 1 woman in 10 in the UK of childbearing age. That's approximately 150,000 in Scotland alone. It has been described as a hidden disease. Although it is as common as diabetes, just too few people talk openly about it, despite the devastating effect that it can have on the lives of so many women. Hopefully, thanks to debates like this and the publicity surrounding the forthcoming Awareness Week, this will all change. For too long, it has been a subject that has not been openly and frankly discussed. If not a taboo subject, it's one that people suffer from behind closed doors. In stark medical terms, endometriosis is not an infection, but a disease in which the tissue, similar to the lining of the uterus, grows elsewhere in the body, such as the lining of the pelvis, the ovaries, the bowel, and the bladder. The tissue reacts to the menstrual cycle each month and also bleed. However, there is no way for the blood to leave the body. The result can be devastating to sufferers: inflammation, severe pain, infertility, painful and heavy periods, and fatigue. These factors can then contribute towards the onset of depression, feelings of isolation, problems with relationships, and difficulty in fulfilling work and social commitments. Deputy Presiding Officer, when preparing for today's debate, I found the story of a woman who has struggled with the condition since she was 13. Like so many women, the diagnosis was far from immediate. A variety of potential causes were suggested. The pain and the fatigue around the time of her periods meant that time had to be taken off school and then university and ultimately work. After having found a loving and understanding partner, she faced additional despair of finding that she was unable to actually conceive. Another sufferer, a woman from Edinburgh, whose own words bring home the effects that the condition can have and her determination to reclaim her life. Endometriosis has a huge impact on my daily life. The pain is constant, and I have now been in daily pain for 3 years. This has led to not being able to make plans, as I wouldn't know how I would feel from one day to the next. This has affected my relationships with my partner, family and friends. But I have been lucky that they've all been very supportive and understanding. My work has been affected, and there is the real prospect that I may lose my job due to this illness. I have come to accept that I shall be in pain on a daily basis. I try to remain positive. This debilitating, invisible disease is no longer going to control my life. For many others, the constant pain and unpredictability of their lives can bring on isolation and depression. Not all women have partners, families or friends who understand how their loved ones can be so debilitated and so fatigued. So it is vital that these people are also not forgotten. They also suffer, and more needs to be done to make sure that they also learn that this is a subject that can be discussed openly and that support is available to them. Endometriosis Group, under the auspices of Endometriosis UK, offer a real lifeline to sufferers and their families, offering help, support and advice on how to understand and manage the condition. Deputy Presiding Officer, it's always good to talk. And I'm proud that today this chamber has gone a step further forward by proving that it is also okay to talk, period. Thank you.
I call Stuart Stevenson to be followed by Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and let me thank Kenny Gibson for giving us the opportunity to discuss this topic this evening. I believe endometriosis is a topic heavily under-discussed, especially considering the range of people it affects. And perhaps for me as a man, particularly a man in his 70s, my generation of men were not much engaged or had discussed anything to do with female reproduction. Indeed, it was only after my mother's death that I discovered the year before I was born she had an ectopic pregnancy resulting in the loss of a fallopian tube. And thus the risks she took in giving birth to me, my brother and my sister were very substantial. Just not the sort of thing that we discuss with men of my generation. So tonight's debate is an opportunity to engage men, but also to reflect the needs of women. And in fact, just this morning, I spoke with a young woman diagnosed with the disease. She was eager to hear tonight's discussion and grateful for Parliament's steps in raising awareness and hopefully in furthering research to find a cure. The idea that there's no cure for a disease that affects 1 in 10 women in the world is almost unbelievable in the modern age, especially when you think about the great medical advances that have been made in other areas. And yet, despite all these women living with the disease, the number of people who have even heard of the disease, including myself until the debate came up, was almost unbelievable. Endo's impact is wider and more destructive than it looks at first glance. On the one hand, the chronic pain and fatigue that comes with it, not just physical pain, but also the mental consequences that come with it. But fundamentally, I understand that the effect on each person suffering from it can be quite significantly different from someone else. Some might experience a host of symptoms, while some are almost asymptomatic. Regardless, living with an incurable disease day in, day out is not something that any of us would wish to take lightly. And it doesn't just affect the individual suffering from the condition. Friends and family of a woman diagnosed will also feel the strain of this condition. It places strain on relationships, commitments to work and social lives when a woman is in too much pain to go out of the house or even to rise from bed. And these are women who are often, frankly, and I say it with no pleasure whatsoever, disproportionately keeping families going, keeping children at school, and simultaneously undertaking a career. Now, there are a number of support groups for women with the disease who they can meet others suffering, and that's a useful outlet, I'm sure. However, I wonder what would happen if we, and I mean the medical field, government, society as a whole, became more proactive, because we do need to offer more. It's a disease that's been under the rug, under the carpet, and out of public conversation for too long. Talking about disease, particularly one that is gender-based, can sometimes be quite difficult, particularly for us men. So I hope that mothers, wives, daughters, sisters, friends will take some comfort from the fact that at least some of the men in the Parliament are engaged with this. And I know that women who are diagnosed with endometriosis, we are in your corner and cheering on advancements that we hope will come. But the fight for many women is, of course, a silent one. But during Endometriosis Awareness Week in March, it's for all of us to stand up and speak on the subject. We do need strong women in this, as in so many other things, to lead us, direct us, pressure for new research, create new treatment options, and ultimately find a cure. We hope that this debate will raise awareness. Let's keep talking about it. I love talking, so it's easy for me. For others, it may be more difficult, but I encourage them to do that, even if it's not something they naturally would do. Our goal should be to find a day when no woman has to fight against her own body. Presiding Officer.
I call Monica Lennon to be followed by Alexandra Burnett.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful to Kenneth Gibson for bringing this debate to Parliament so that we can highlight Endometriosis Awareness Week. And I'm pleased that the key theme of this year's Awareness Week is focused on encouraging women to talk about their periods, particularly those who experience painful, heavy, difficult or irregular periods, which can be a sign of the condition. Because it seems clear that the shameful lack of awareness and understanding about endometriosis is most likely attributed to an enduring taboo around menstruation itself and the reluctance we can have in talking about it openly. Encouraging women of all ages, backgrounds and ethnicities to talk more openly about our health, our bodies and experience of menstruation is an important step in empowering women to make informed choices about their own health care. Menstruation is a natural, normal bodily function experienced by the vast majority of women of reproductive age every month of their lives. Yet the cult of silence, which so often seems to exist around periods, means that those who suffer from endometriosis find it difficult to get diagnosed and face a poor public understanding of their condition and how it affects their everyday lives. Brushing off period pain as inconvenient women's troubles makes it all the more difficult for those with endometriosis to get the help they need to deal with this painful condition, which can seriously disrupt their lives. I was shocked to discover that this condition does affect over 1.5 million women across the UK, and as Alison Harris rightly points out, this means the numbers of women affected by this condition are comparable to those affected by diabetes, and yet the awareness about endometriosis remains so woefully poor. Endometriosis is much more than just having a painful period. It is a serious gynecological health condition that can seriously impact a woman's life. And like Alison Harris, I too was struck by the experience of Lindsay, who is a co-leader for an Edinburgh-based support group who has written about her condition. Lindsay's story on how work and relationships have been affected, and the stories of other women like her, underline just how important it is that policymakers and members in this place ensure that we are working together to both raise awareness about endometriosis, to ensure that women can get diagnosed earlier, and also to invest in further research about how to improve treatment for those affected. The debilitating nature of endometriosis and the irregular bleeding, which many women who have experienced throughout their life, for me also highlights another point about the way in which we as a society talk about and cater for menstruation and women's rights to be healthy. In Scotland today, the affordability and accessibility of sanitary products remains a pressing problem for far too many women. This is an issue which I've been campaigning on, and it's something I've raised with the government numerous times in the Chamber, including during my own members' debate on sanitary products back in September last year. And like Stuart Stevenson, I normally like to talk, but I'm having difficulty with that today. Not being able to access sanitary products can happen to women for a number of reasons, due to a restriction or lack of income, perhaps due to irregular periods, which means women are caught unawares. And access can also be a problem for young women, teenagers and girls who are still in education and have little or no income of their own. Presiding Officer, I have been pushing the Government to keep looking at this issue and to consider what can be done here in Scotland to alleviate this gendered inequality. Given the topic of today's debate, the issue of availability and cost of sanitary products is especially acute for those 10% of women of reproductive age who suffer from endometriosis. Perhaps that is something which the Minister could elaborate on in closing, to set out plans for how the Government would consider alleviating the burden for those women with the condition. Thank you.
The last of the open speeches is Alexander Burnett.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I have to confess that when I signed this motion, it was more an acknowledgement of how this can affect someone, as opposed to possessing any knowledge of endometriosis itself. However, as a signatory of this motion, I was given the opportunity to speak and inform myself of this condition and how it affects women. And I'd like to thank Kenneth Gibson for bringing this members' debate and subject to the Chamber and the opportunity to talk on it. And one of the starkest things that I found was the lack of information that is out there. In this debate, we've heard many times the same national statistics, but it's very difficult to get information that's local to our own constituencies. And after contacting Endometriosis UK, we struggled to find specific data on how many women are being treated or diagnosed with the condition within the North East. However, I was pleased to find that the first Scottish BSGE endometriosis centre was set up in Aberdeen. And yet these centres are not necessarily the centre of a woman's experience with endometriosis. And after speaking to a woman in the North East, she repeated the awareness problem, as well as the concerns on the huge length of time it takes to be diagnosed. So I'd like to take a minute to share her story. Her symptoms started at the age of 15. However, the prospect of having endometriosis wasn't even considered until her mid-20s, when she was finally diagnosed. And this is where women are facing the biggest problem. Not enough people are aware of it. She had to endure constant trips to the doctors, multiple tests, and reviews of treatments she had undertaken. And all the time, her symptoms were getting worse. Now, women suffering from endometriosis suffer an average of 7.5 years until reaching diagnosis. But we forget the impact this has on a sufferer's physical and mental health. Whilst it's not life-threatening, it is certainly debilitating, with the worst cases causing infertility. Mentally, failure to diagnose can cause depression, anxiety, and stress of whether their symptoms can be eased. It can also have an impact on your social life, making women shut off from friends and loved ones as they suffer in silence. And a statistic which shocked me was that the same number of women are also affected by diabetes, between a staggering 1.5 to 2 million women in the UK. But diabetes is a condition which most people on the street could speak for 5 minutes without research. But endometriosis, I admit I had to Google it. And many of us are uncomfortable talking about it. And that may be why I didn't even know that this had touched the life of one of my own staff. Now, raising awareness is easier said than done. But when it comes to our health, it should be a priority. In schools across the country, children are receiving guidance on universities, peer pressure, and sex education. Yet the second most common gynecological condition is barely mentioned. So we should be pushing for increased awareness, and we should be talking about it in places which can really make a difference. We should make this a conversation that is no longer uncomfortable. So whilst our scientists and doctors across the country continue to research treatments to help women, we as a society can help, simply in our awareness and understanding. Thank you.
I now call Aileen Campbell to close this debate. Around 7 minutes, please, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm grateful to Kenny Gibson for bringing this topic to the Chamber for debate, and especially as he outlined at the start, it has been 16 years since it was last discussed in the Chamber. And I think it does provide a timely opportunity to acknowledge the commitment and the dedication of our NHS staff in diagnosing and treating endometriosis. And I'd like to also acknowledge the efforts of Endometriosis UK in their pursuit of continue to raise awareness of what can be an extremely debilitating condition. And I'd also like to welcome Anne Devlin to the Parliament and pay tribute to her and her efforts to raise awareness of the condition. Young women, as we've heard this evening in particular, need to be encouraged to seek help at an early stage. This can increase their ability to conceive later in life and may not experience the symptoms that can impact on their quality of life. Or as Endometriosis UK have published in their report, this costs the UK £8.2 billion a year in treatment through loss of work, being off their work, and the healthcare costs and a whole range of other factors which proves costly to the UK, and certainly is something that we need to work to improve upon. We in the Scottish Government have a positive relationship with Endometriosis UK, whose campaign It's OK to Talk, period, has been running for several years now, and we're actively involved in the Chief Medical Officers group that looked at improving early diagnosis and treatment. Now, Endometriosis UK's survey that was published a year ago also helped establish where people with endometriosis prefer to be treated, which found that most people want the care provided by specialist service centres. Specialist endometriosis centres bring together experts in gynaecology and surgery, in urology, in pain management and psychology, together with nursing support. And patients are discussed at multidisciplinary meetings to plan the best treatment. And this person-centred approach helps ensure the early, accurate diagnosis and better informed care. Specialist centres can be accredited by the British Society for Gynaecological Endoscopy to help ensure consistent delivery of high-quality care. And that high-quality care is absolutely necessary and urgent. And I think, as Alison Harris, who articulated, and Kenny Gibson also articulated, the real-life realities for women living with this condition, which I think illustrates the real need to ensure that the quality of care that women get if they have this condition is as good as it can possibly be, and that they require no less than specialist support and care. In 2015, the CMOs group recommended that NHS Scotland should continue to implement accredited specialist centres. And I'm pleased to say that there are now 2 in Scotland at Aberdeen Royal Infirmary, the first of its kind in Scotland, and Edinburgh Royal Infirmary. And these centres provide multidisciplinary, state-of-the-art, high-quality and person-centred treatment for the management of all grades of endometriosis. They also have an important role in raising awareness. And I would point members to the Edinburgh Centre's website, which provides patients with detailed information on the members of the specialist team, the condition and its symptoms, what happens at the clinic, the treatments and the surgical options available, information for clinicians and details of how people can access its services. The Edinburgh Centre also works with Endometriosis UK, and together they've signposted links to a wide variety of organisations that offer additional support. This information that is so important to help women cope with the condition is what we expect all centres to develop. And I expect all centres to work together to ensure reliable, accessible and relevant information is available. And this is part of the approach that I think is needed and absolutely necessary to ensure the condition is talked about in a much more open sense, is known about, and that women can be empowered to deal earlier with the condition should that be what they are facing. Because earlier diagnosis is clearly necessary. The heartbreaking testimonies heard this evening illustrates that we need to continue to build on the work that has been carried out so far by the Chief Medical Officer and the specialist centres. So there is clearly much more that we need to do. The CMOs group concluded that we really need 3 centres if we're to fully meet the needs of patients right across the country. And that's why the CMOs group recommended that the West of Scotland NHS boards should look to set up a specialist centre in the region. And while I've had assurances from NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, who are leading on the development of the centre, that a business case will be ready for the beginning of April. And if that business case is approved, implementation of the West of Scotland Centre will follow without further delay. This is work in progress and I'd be happy to update members in due course. But on this debate that has been raised by Kenny Gibson, I hope that it provides a bit more reassurance to him and his constituents that there will be some light at the end of the tunnel, and that his constituents will be able to, I hope, in the near future, be able to access that specialist care that is not currently there in the west of Scotland. The final recommendation from the CMO's group was that the NHS Scotland should consider setting up a national managed clinical network to ensure standardised and coordinated care for patients across Scotland. The National Specialist Services Committee, which makes recommendations on the commissioning of national networks, recommended that in the first instance, though, we should look to establish the third specialist centre in Glasgow. And I think perhaps people would agree that we want to focus on getting that up and running and then look at where other improvements can be made. Their thinking is that by working collaboratively together, the three centres should be able to fulfil the aims of a national network and ensure consistent and coordinated care for all endometriosis patients. And I'll be maintaining a keen interest in how the proposals for a specialist centre in the West progresses, and I remain open to revisiting the need for a national network, depending on whether the three centres can work together to deliver these aims. But I also do wish to be clear that while the West proposal is being taken forward, and while that is to be celebrated, women can be referred to centres in Aberdeen or Edinburgh. And certainly if constituents here have any evidence or any constituent cases to the contrary of that, I'd be happy as well to take that on board. But the Scottish Government remains absolutely committed to ensuring that Scotland's NHS continues to be world class, and I very much expect that having 3 accredited centres in Scotland will go some way to achieving this aim. They'll help raise awareness among the public and, importantly, among healthcare professionals. They'll ensure that women living with endometriosis have access to that speedy diagnostics and the best treatment available. So in short, they'll deliver better care, better outcomes, and ultimately the better quality of life that we all wish to see. But nevertheless, I think what is clear is that we continue to ensure that endometriosis is talked about fully in this parliamentary chamber, that we continue to build on the work that has been carried out by the CMO and the specialist centres, that we look towards making sure that the outcomes we expect from the centre in the West delivers on those aspirations, and that we don't continue to hear people talking or feeling that they're having to have their lives blighted, that they feel supported in this condition, in managing this condition, that they feel supported and they can talk openly about it. And that for us in this parliamentary chamber, it's not another 16 years before we raise awareness of this condition that impacts upon many women's lives in our country. So thank you.
I close this debate, and you may now show your appreciation if you wish.